1053 Meter.
Wie viel hast du noch? Hast du noch 2 Stunden?
Genau auf der ersten Karte. Da habe ich noch 40 und bei der zweiten 2 Stunden.
willkommen zu unserer letzten Runde, in der es um die Rekonstruktion von Raum und Zeit geht, the reconstruction of space and time. Dafür haben wir zwei ausgesprochen spannende Referenten gefunden. Zum einen Ina Neddermeyer. Noch das zweite? Oh, alles gut. Zum einen Ina Neddermeyer, die am Zeppelin-Museum in Friedrichshafen die Abteilung Kunst leitet. Ihre Geschichte, ihre berufliche Karriere hat sie in Erlangen begonnen, am Kunstpalais, wo sie Sammlungsleiterin war. Und sie beschäftigt sich mit dem Thema von Virtual Reality, Augmented Reality und wie diese unterschiedlichen Realitäten, die alle in irgendeiner Art und Form natürlich mit dem Smartphone verbunden sind, auf uns Auswirkungen haben, welche Auswirkungen die haben und wie das Ganze letztendlich unsere eigene Wahrnehmung verändert. Nach ihr wird Nathan Su kommen, auf den ich mich auch sehr freue, von der Gruppe Forensic Architecture. Ina Neddermeyer, ich freue mich, dass Sie da sind und bin wirklich super gespannt, was Sie uns erzählen.
Yeah, thank you for this kind introduction and thank you for the invitation to talk today about the question, is virtuality our new reality? The smartphone at the interface of an imaging technological transformation. Augmented reality, mixed reality and virtual reality. The possibilities opened up by the establishment of virtual worlds radically question what we call reality. Numerous artists are reflecting on this process and appropriating immersive visual media. As viewers, we are directly inside the virtual worlds, and due to this presence, we perceive these virtual spaces as a form of reality. This immersion in illusionary worlds is by no means unprecedented. It is grounded in a long tradition. The idea of engendering our three-dimensional perception both in pictures and in spatial is a central topic of art. For instance, the so-called trompe-l'œil effect presents painted reality as a true reality and is a recurring motif in art history. Furthermore, panoramas, dioramas and stereoscopic images, as you can see here, illustrate the century-old history of mankind's interest in immersive media and can be considered as precursors to virtual images. The crucial point is the desire to transport viewers into other worlds and realities. So there is a long tradition, as I said, in this immersion, in this illusionary worlds, and it's by no means without history. First of all, I have to say that virtual and real worlds do not exist parallel to each other, but they overlap in a variety of ways. They represent a continuum, can complement and enrich each other. So they are in a state of permanent exchange. My lecture is concerned with these artistic debates and reflects on the varieties of virtuality, from augmented reality to virtual reality. At the interface, the smartphone as a display plays a crucial role for generating these virtual images. And I'm going to start with augmented reality. To define augmented reality, or as we would say in German, erweiterte Realität, you can say that AR describes a computer-aided extension, augmented of course, of the perception of reality. For example, by computer graphics. And in contrast to virtual reality, where our world is almost completely replaced by a computer-generated world, AR is an additional information that can be displayed on a smartphone through superimposition. So here you can see the reality-virtuality continuum from reality where you have this physical world and then to virtuality as a process, and in between is augmented reality and augmented virtuality. the applications of augmented reality can be operated with glasses, such as the HoloLens, or which is more common with smartphones. A popular example for an application of augmented reality would be the insertion of further information during the use of Google Maps, including an augmented reality street view mode to help you follow directions, along with personalized recommendations to help you discover places in your neighborhood, as you can see on the left side. The augmentation of every reality impression together with all extra information occurs live, so in real time. And mostly the term augmented reality is used in connection with a visually extended depiction, and therefore functionally often reduced to the extension of only the visual perception of its users. But of course, there are other augmentations thinkable. For instance, the auditory sense can benefit of AR functions. For instance, there's the voice announcement in public transport. So the software tracks down the recent location and based on this information determines the next stop. And as a result, the passenger can hear a combination of different pieces of text and hence knows about the next stop and direction of the exit. AR can be traced back to the 1960s, and there's a big discussion about it was really invented in the 1960s. There's a computer scientist, Ivan Sutherland, who created maybe the first AR head-mounted display system, but it was really developed further in the following decades and allowed simulations that were used for aviation, military, and industrial purposes. Mobile augmented reality is relatively newly, but developing very quickly. The first AR browsers, browser apps like Layer, have been developed between 2008 and 10, and with the appearance of the iPhone in 2009, the iPhone 3GS, which had the necessary sensors and more computing power, mobile AR became really interesting for the mass market. And today, augmented reality has been explored for many applications. You can see on the right side Pokemon Go, that you might know. It was quite popular in 2016, a huge success not only for augmented reality but also for the gaming industry. But there are other applications like entertainment, medicine, advertisement, business and education. And before I want to present you two artistic AR applications, I want to show you the project or the application the German telestation WDR has released recently. It is an application called AR 1933 to 1945, and this app has been developed especially for children and teenagers, and it takes you back in the stories and experience children and teenagers gained during the Third Reich in Germany, England and in Russia, because the last contemporary witnesses are at an advanced age. They are over 80 years at the moment, and they were children during this time. And with this application you can transfer the persons and their stories into the present. Now I would like to introduce two AR applications artists have developed. The first is made by Will Papenheimer. He created the augmented reality application Proxy 5 WM2A, very complicated title. And it's a computer supported extension of the perception of reality, and it's kind of a virtual designer drug that he developed. And it was the intention to simulate a real drug trip. And of course the title mimics the actual elements of such drug trips and refers on the other hand to the institution that commissioned the piece, the Whitney Museum of Art, where the piece is now part of the collection. And it was designed as a farewell gesture to the museum, because they moved from the old iconic long-time Breuer building to the new building by Renzo Piano. And so the piece was presented at the old building's closing party. The two in the title therefore refers to the museum's two buildings that existed at the same time. And Will Pappenheimer says, I specifically built this as a dissociative drug. And the artist deliberately uses core elements of dissociative drugs to give viewers the opportunity to part with the old building. And it's also mediated by acoustic and visual interferences, and to get closer to the new museum. And I will show you a short video. And since the computer and the mobile devices are in fact both an extension of our body and the psyche, the effect of a virtual or digital drug is in some way the same as a pharmacological drug. And as you could see, the drug was consumed via smartphones as an augmented experience of reality, and it was delivered to the guests via the image of a pill, and you could scan the QR code, which then could be, and then you were transferred into the Layer app. Hallucinatory elements infiltrating the phone superimposed a 360-degree view of the party. Visitors themselves expressed great enthusiasm. I got high on an augmented reality drug at the Whitney Museum was the Vogue's headline in its review. But in the end, you have to say that it's more a controlled loss of control, a simulation of a possible drug trip than a real drug trip. But in the case of this particular AR experience, the status of the virtual realities remain open. One can question whether AR is real and physical, or merely a virtual simulation, or maybe in this case more a psychological phenomenon. And the second application that I would like to show you is made by Julia Bowinkel and Friedemann Banz, who form the artist duo Banz and Bowinkel. And in their work, they deal with the computer as an everyday medium and its influence on our society. They explore the relationship between virtual and real worlds and question if the computer and the smartphone are an extension of our bodies. They created their own augmented reality app that you can see here. It's called the Banz and Bowinkel AR. And there you can see computer-generated prints that show snapshots of fluid simulations. And viewers can use the app to scan the pictures and reveal a virtual layer of video and 3D animations on your mobile device. And whereas Pappenheimer's app is only working in the old museum of the Whitney Museum, so in this old building, the application of Banz and Bowinkel is working nearly everywhere. You can also scan digital images, and then it's starting the AR application, so you don't have to be in front of the physical image. Since its introduction, virtual reality has been linked to different promises of salvation: empathy machine, ultimate escape from reality, new image revolution, so it's kind of a perfect projection surface. VR has evidently had a defining impact on our perception of images as well as our connection to reality. Virtual spaces create illusionary worlds we can access and experience directly. Secluded from the outside world, VR enables an immersion into visual spheres. Instead of standing in front of pictures, we are inside pictorial worlds. This presence allows us to perceive virtual spaces as a kind of reality that goes hand in hand with intense physical involvement. This technological development not only influences our perception of images, but also changes the way, and of course it will change, the way in which we communicate, interact, work, and live. Technologies with mass appeal already feature largely in everyday life. Moreover, the various forms of application in psychotherapy, neuroscience, the entertainment industry, of course gaming is a big player here, porn industry, modern warfare, and journalism. There's this famous New York Times VR application, and Arte launched their own VR app as well, are proof of the increasingly strong influence of virtual images. And this leads to the fundamental question, is virtuality our new reality? And I would like to present you two VR apps that are accessible at the moment. There's the Acute Art app. You can see that a lot of really big artists like Marina Abramovic, Natalie Djurberg, Olafur Eliasson are taking part. And Acute Art is a virtual and augmented reality production company, and they collaborate with artists, providing access to this technology and try to support artists to translate their ideas into digital mediums. And on the right side, you can see the Artist's VR app that was developed or produced by the New Museum. It contains 6 commissioned works by artists like John Ruffman or Rachel Rosen. And you just need a head-mounted display to explore these applications. And so I don't know if you have ever seen these cardboards. This is a very basic, cheap cardboard where you just put your smartphone in, then you close it, and then you can watch these applications. Seeing a VR experience for the first time can be overwhelming because, of course, of the immersive effects. Although probably in the not too distant future, VR HMDs will become an integral part of everyday life, they represent a new technological setup for a large part of the population at the moment. This leads to a strong physical involvement, which is a challenge for the sense of balance. These new spatial experiences make viewers feel their bodies in a very strong and direct sensation. In some cases, they suffer from motion sickness. Nausea is caused by the lack of proprioceptive signals corresponding to the impression that you should be moving physically as your point of view changes, but you're not changing this you're only changing this in the virtual world, but not in the physical world. And I want to show you one example of a very interesting VR work. It's a quite linear narrative VR artwork by a Kenyan artist collective called the Nest Collective. And the title of the work is Let This Be a Warning. And it shows in a very good way that VR technologies establish new forms of narrations. As viewers, as I said, are addressed and involved directly, they can become part of the narration. And in this case, the storyline follows a group of African people who have left Earth to colonize a distant planet. And putting on the VR headset, viewers are instantly immersed in the installation as they arrive on a planet and have to ask themselves if they would be welcomed in a black world. The artist collective thus raises question of race and segregation, of course, because you're confronted with these black people. And so science fiction here is not simply referred to the level of content, but also to the implementation of a cutting-edge technology that has a greater capacity to immerse viewer in a future world. And so the Nest Collective is visualizing an alternative, new perspective. And of course also makes the socio-political dimension of these technologies visible. And of course it's not only playful and attractive and appealing worlds that are existing and are developed, and it's also a matter of control, who's controlling the new virtual worlds. So as you can see, smartphone as a device can be used for AR and VR applications, and that means very different approaches to virtual worlds. The display itself is treated very differently in both cases. In the case of AR, the display stays visible as you can see the device that is used. In the case of VR, the display as a physical object fades into the background and it seems to disappear as soon as the viewer puts the HMD on. And this is of course a very theoretical approach, as the headsets themselves remain visible with their edges and they're always noticeable in their weight. And in the immersive VR installations, the viewers perceive the virtual images primarily as unframed image spaces. The boundary between image and non-image blurs as the virtual image offers a 360-degree view. So there's no possibility to look away. You're really or completely in the virtual world, and there's the only possibility to take the HMD off. And so you can say the space of the VR work and the space of the viewer, these two spaces overlap and they really become one. And due to the manipulation of the brain, you could say, by the images, the technology makes a vivid experience possible. We perceive these virtual spaces as a form of reality, as it is not only imagined but experienced directly on, as you could see, on a physical level. And even the situation is unreal, the experiences are real and have sometimes physical effects. And this capability is important in the context of therapies for treatments of phobia and trauma, for instance. And whereas AR enriches physical reality with virtual content, VR makes use of the dislocation, so the detachment from the here and now and transference into a different context. In VR and AR installations, the displays are not longer presented in a statically inserted form, but they are mobile and flexible, available. So the application starts whenever the visitors use their smartphones or put on the headset, and it stops as soon as you take, for instance, the HMD off. Generally, it is possible to watch or to experience AR together with others. Viewing a VR installation is a solitary experience. It is only possible that one person wears the HMD at a time, and therefore the audience or the other people are excluded to a certain extent. And of course these digital technologies allow a reflection on reality and our relationship to this reality. They serve as a tool to counteract rigid structures of perception, to meditate on the visible and the non-visible, and of course the capacity of images to manipulate. And for artists, these digital simulations mean the ability to create imaginary worlds with their own logic and dynamics. The virtual space that VR and AR open up emerges as a space of possibility. Of course, this full immersion into visual worlds raises up critical questions. As Peter Geimer observes, the mediating distance is the condition for engaging in an interrelation with the work, critical, amazed, interested, indifferent, bored. Eliminating the aesthetic distance also means losing the chance to take a stand. So, yeah, this is of course a critical approach that is true. But on the other hand, the digital technologies open up completely new possibilities to work with. And it's very clear that curators and artists have just begun to explore the potentials of the new technologies, and there are new concepts, or there have to be new concepts to be found to show exhibitions and to create artwork. Currently, I would say that the interconnection between different layers of reality, the virtual and the real, that is, in my view, the most interesting part, and that generates the most interesting approaches. So, thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ina Neddermeyer. I think it's very interesting to see that also artists work or try to work with augmented or virtual reality. I saw at Skulpturenprojekte Münster there was one project at least in which augmented reality was part of. I forgot the name of the installation. It was in the former ice stadium. There was a huge world, and you could.
Pierre-Hugues.
Yeah.
Pierre-Hugues.
And it didn't work on my smartphone. I downloaded it.
Yeah.
It was not a perfect simulation or whatever into another space. But there was when you opened up the whole field, explaining what it can be used for. For me, as a skeptical person, some questions appeared when you said that it will be used for therapy. I thought, well, when I think about who is investing into these projects, I'm quite sure that it will not only be used for therapy, but also for torture. Because how wonderfully can you work with somebody if you force him to watch somebody which is complementary to his own mindset? For instance, have you any knowledge about developments for the which can be used by the superpowers so far? I mean, not the fancy superpowers, but the military ones.
Yeah, I don't know if there are torture projects, but of course it's like the perfect instrument to torture someone, because you cannot escape and you're really into. You can close your eyes, but still when you have to open it again, so you're in this virtual world, and so I think it's a perfect instrument for torture. Like, but I know that it's used it started with the US Army. They used it for military purposes to help soldiers to overcome that trauma, and they started it in Germany as well. So this is what I know that it's used for. I don't know if there are torture things going on.
Very interesting. So, back again. Questions? Yeah, Jasmin.
Small comment, maybe. Maybe I managed to raise a question, but I'm not sure yet. This is what Alistair also said, and yesterday we had it also, that the smartphone is connected to our bodies, and this was very clear when you talked. And Alistair said that the connection between the people you had to, or you wanted to take pictures of, was closer, because there was not this border, this technological border, because everybody knows how to handle a smartphone. And I think it's quite interesting in the AR and VR world that it disconnects you again from the people around you somehow. So there's this shift with this new technology that you are by yourself, and it's not anymore maybe the connecting part, which usually is a phone for that you connect with the world somehow. Not only, but yeah.
Yeah,
So.
I mean, there are people saying the future will be lonesome because you will put your HMD on and then you have this perfect possibility of escaping and you can travel and do whatever you want. But this is only the case for VR. I would say like AR is more open, and I don't know if VR will be the thing of the future or if it would be the other direction, that we will combine these different layers of reality. So I think it will go more in the direction of mixed realities, and then we still have the possibility to communicate and not to be completely lonesome. And there are also some experiments, like multi-user experiences, when you have the HMD on, that you can meet in the virtual world other people. Of course, you meet the avatars, but then you can meet them and talk to them. So this might be also a development as well in the future.
And we should not forget that these VR glasses are pretty new. They are not out for a very long time. So in a couple of years, they probably will lose size, and they will be. It will be possible to integrate them into our daily life quite easy. So.
They were already invented in the 60s, but they were just like waves of virtual reality. So then it got a little bit bigger in the 90s, and then no one was interested anymore. And now there's a peak again, and so we'll see what's going on, if there will be waves or if it's just like fading away.
I guess my question is that I see people are now putting chips in their body so they don't have to carry anything, and they can pay and do things. And augmented reality, that Google had those glasses originally. And how long do you think it'll be before people are changing their body parts and like changing an eyeball for virtual? So not only when you look down the street, you would see, here's the grocery store, here's this. You'd see a person and tell you who it was, can give you some history about them, and then all of a sudden you're augmenting your reality with a lot of information.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we will be cyborgs at a certain point. Yeah.
I wonder if this idea of the immersion is not overjudged in a way, because maybe we all remember the hype around 3D movies when Avatar came out, and now who goes and watches 3D movies anymore? I don't. It gives me nausea, and it's as immersive as the 3D version, the 2D version, I think. And I remember as a young kid when I got my first computer, which was a C64, and I'm sitting in front of this computer, that was immersive. It really sucked me into this strange world. If I look at it now, I can't really recognize what all these pixels are supposed to be. But back then, I was absolutely drawn in. I did wear these quite a few times. I think it was as immersive as this. So this, you can be sucked into everything, and I can get easily bored in a virtual reality world the same way I got bored in front of the telly, and want to go out, and the immersion suddenly stops once you're bored. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know if this is not so overhyped that this is going to suck us all in, and we are going to be lonely. Yeah, we are lonely even in front of the telly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but as I said, like immersion, it's not only connected to virtual images. It can be by book, by film, whatever, discussion. You can be totally immersed, so it's not only connected to virtual reality. But of course, I would say that it's, I don't know if all of you ever tried an HMD and tried a VR application, but it's, for me it's something different because you're so immersed, and when it's getting interactive and you get a response, so it's kind of a new step of immersion, but of course there are other ways of immersion as well.
Actually, we were trying to integrate a VR project into that show, but we were lacking 100,000 euros, so that would have been the cost to install it, but it would have been very nice.
No.
Maybe the next time.
Something that interests me is the sort of the other side of the technology, in that if we were to enter a future in which augmented reality was ubiquitous and we were all seeing digitally enhanced versions of the world as we see, what do you think would be the consequences of everything that a person sees also being recorded? Mm-hmm. So that as a byproduct of needing to overlay information here, we're also producing this sort of archive of the way everyone sees and what everyone sees. And I was just wondering if you have any commentary on what you think that future might be.
Mm. Yeah, big topic. Yeah, I think this will be a huge topic. So we were showing VR works in one exhibition, Brave New Worlds was the title, and we had like the question, because we are recording, how long are people staying in an installation and what are they doing, and all this information, we can gather all this information, and this was kind of, okay, now we have to deal with this information and what to do with this information, and then you have this HoloLens or you have the glasses or whatever. Yeah, that's a huge problem, what to do with the information and like privacy, and yeah. I think this will be a huge topic and a huge problem.
Okay, wenn es keine weiteren Fragen gibt, herzlichen Dank. Vielen Dank, Ina Neddermeier. Ich freue mich jetzt auf Nathan Sue. Nathan Sue ist Mitglied von Forensic Architecture, einer Gruppe aus London, die sich der investigativen Praxis verschrieben hat. Nathan Sue ist von seiner Ausbildung her Architekt. Er hat in London studiert, er lehrt in London, er unterrichtet in Moskau an verschiedenen Instituten und er arbeitet bei Forensic Architecture daran, dass er Objekte in die digitalen Rekonstruktionen einbaut. Der Titel seines Vortrags ist Coincident Projections. Vielen Dank.
Thank you. Thank you very much to Thomas and the whole team thanks everyone for having me here. So I think it's really interesting to talk about this in the context of smartphones. And today, what I'm talking about will sort of touch on a condition created by the fact that we all have these recording devices in our pockets. But I think I'd like to consider it sort of from the point of view of how our world is mediated by images and recordings in general, right? So beyond just the smartphone, but to which the smartphone is like a huge contributor. So today's flaneur scrolls rather than strolls through the world. With our memories of events stored outside our bodies in the devices that see and hear for us, we possess this ability to inhabit the view of others, to switch perspectives and see through the eyes of many at once. Our sensory organs have extended beyond our own bodies and into others via these machines that sense and remember for us. But I'd like to ask that if machines can sense, why not other things? Buildings, architecture. A photograph is merely a series of chemical reactions or electronic signals, responses to a change in environment that causes that change to be registered. And so we might think of memory as the trace that an environmental change leaves on an object, be that object a mind, a sheet of film, a bone, or a building. So exposure to light causes chemicals on photosensitive film to react, imprinting an image of a moment on a material surface. exposure to the habits, traumas, and labour that a human experiences leaves traces as fractures, textures, and deformations in bone, imprinting the history of a life lived in material volume. And in turn, exposure to fires, bombs, and bullets leave their traces as burns, cracks, and holes in architecture, imprinting the history of urban conflict in matter. And so the word aesthetics in its original Greek form meant to perceive. And so we might consider that every object and every image has its own aesthetic quality, or its own way of perceiving the world around it. So for a bit of background on what forensic architecture is, we're a research agency that operates on this premise, that objects and images that make up contemporary urban life are perceiving and sensing entities. So for us, the recognition that architecture and mass digital media perceive their environments is particularly significant when we rethink the power of civil society in urban conflict. So traditionally, forensics is a tool employed by state powers, as states are the ones that hold the authority and the technical infrastructure to control access to evidence. And it's this evidence which they and other organisations are then held accountable to. So the fact that largely states hold themselves accountable is particularly problematic in the cases where those same states execute violence upon their own populations or craft narratives justifying the use of violence against others. However, if we consider the possibility that the streets, the facades, and the public squares in which this violence is enacted, if we consider that these places remember the acts that occur on and within them, we might try to invert the forensic gaze of the state in a practice that we refer to as counter-forensics. So this practice is exploratory and experimental, and often requires us to develop new tools for image analysis, 3D modelling, data mining, and visual communication. And so we're therefore a multidisciplinary practice. We're made up of architectural researchers, filmmakers, programmers, journalists, lawyers, and archaeologists. So our mandate is to work on behalf of non-state organisations to investigate contemporary conflicts and human rights violations through rigorous analysis of digital media and dynamic 3D modelling of events. So today I'm going to take you through a few of our investigations in order to illustrate some of the techniques that we've developed and that we're working on. But I just want to give a quick warning that the following slides have some images of violent events. So it's nothing directly graphic or gory, but they are videos that sometimes imply violence and in some cases death. So just please bear that in mind. So I'm going to briefly start with the case that's exhibited here as part of the exhibition and examines the bombing of a mosque in Al-Jina, which is near Aleppo in Syria. It was a project that was self-initiated by the office and it was conceptualized as a quick emergency response project when the team realized in early 2017 that the US had potentially bombed an operating civilian mosque. So this investigation took place before I joined the FA team. So the full story you can see in the film. But I'm going to point out some of the methods that we use that will also become relevant for some of the other projects I'm going to show you through this project. So our work often starts with evidence that's in the public domain. And we found that social media networks and channels like Twitter tend to supply us with a wealth of real-time, often citizen-sourced recordings of urban warfare. So this case started with a single image released by the US Central Command, or CENTCOM. And it was released on their Twitter account showing a semi-destroyed building, apparently to show that their precision airstrike had killed dozens of Al-Qaeda militants who were meeting in a partially constructed meeting hall without targeting or damaging what they said was the mosque in the top left corner of the photo. So a Syrian civil organisation, the White Helmets, claimed that 38 civilians, including 5 children, were killed in this strike. And we were trying to establish the use of the building that was destroyed. So this introduces sort of one of our first techniques where we reconstruct 3D models to locate and view images and videos. And this technique we refer to as the architectural image complex. So here we projection map visual media into a navigable virtual model, allowing for an investigator and a viewer to move between media without cutting in space or time. So in this sense, our models are operative and representational. And this means that we use them both for research, so as an investigation is ongoing, we work through these models to fill in and construct our understanding of the site through corroborating photographs and other media. And also for communication, so to explain spatial scenarios in public fora, like art spaces, or legal fora, like the courts. So in this case, we use this method of image projection to compare footage of the mosque from before its destruction to footage filmed by a local photographer that we contacted after the strike. And here the architecture, the scale and proportion of windows and roofs and doors allowed us to match interior and exterior footage and allowed us to detail the interior of our model, showing us that there were elements such as the Athan speaker, shoe shelves, floor rugs, and the mihrab, which all verify that the building was in fact a functioning mosque. What was interesting is that these navigable models also become sites in which witness testimony can be illustrated. And so we've used these 3D models as live memory aids in interviews with witnesses who can use the model to describe the location of internal walls, furniture, and people. And so for this project, the architectural plan became a recurring communicative tool for our investigation team and people that we interviewed on site who recounted the mosque's internal layout via drawings of plans sent over smartphones. So we refer to this process of comparing remote imagery, such as satellite imagery and drone footage, with local media and testimony as ground truthing. So in this case, we were lucky enough to have a local photographer who captured and sent us material on his phone, which also allowed us to confirm the use of Hellfire missiles beyond the bombs that hit the building. And this indicated that fleeing people were also targeted. So the photographer on the ground captured the distinctive marks of a fragmentation pattern on the road leading to the mosque, which we were able to insert into our 3D model by matching the image with the position of our road and objects in the scene, like electricity poles. So in all cases where we have access to visual media, we use this ground truthing method, where we verify testimony, news reports, and our own interpretations by corroborating on-site media in a navigable 3D model. So perhaps no case illustrates this concept of relational media better than the Grenfell Tower fire of June 2017. This is still an ongoing investigation for us, and it's got some live elements, so what I'm showing you today is partially old work. So while we're currently formulating our response, this is sort of what's able to be public so far. This has been a unique case for us, not least because it occurred in London, so close to home for most of us. But it's also a case where we're not necessarily looking to point fingers or assign blame, but rather to assemble a public record of the event that gathers all available evidentiary resources in a single place. So Grenfell was another case that we initiated as a self-funded and initiated project. And waking to the news on June 14th, we decided that we could help in efforts to make sense of the thousands of documents and videos captured on the night of the fire. So taking place in London, one of the world's most networked and watched cities, we were presented in this case with an unprecedented amount of footage, one of the reasons that this has become such a large and long project. And so we're aiming to assemble all this footage together in what we're calling a media archive by using a 3D model of the site to hold all the recordings. And we ultimately hope that this will be available as a web-based interactive platform through which the public can explore the sequence of events as described through a media evidence. As our investigation started alongside a government public inquiry into the fire, our work was limited to evidence in the public domain, so footage from news reports and rushes, YouTube, Twitter, and Periscope feeds, as well as media sent to us by the public after our open call for media. In this case, even before the inquiry started releasing police and firefighter videos, CCTV stills, and expert reports, this was hundreds of videos and thousands of files. And our first task was to synchronize all this material in time. And while metadata on video files often allows us to establish recording times and, if we're lucky, GPS locations, most online streaming sites like YouTube or even some file sharing sites strip a file of all this metadata. And because of how we were collecting these files from the public, it meant that a lot were not originals and therefore didn't have this metadata. And so it was several months of work for our team to piece together a media timeline of events using time-stamped continuous videos from Sky News as our guide. And so on this timeline that we constructed, we can see footage being divided by a facade and playing back in real time. So black on screen indicates that no footage was taken of that facade at that time. And this process required us to find visually synchronous moments in videos, such as distinctive explosions on the facade or recognizable movements of people, in order to establish the time on our publicly sourced videos. We did further synchronization through audio using shouts, sirens, and conversations heard in multiple media to align footage. And I just want to use that as an opportunity to make a little short segue to say that it highlights the importance of keeping original files if you ever capture anything that might be useful as evidence one day. So capturing events with your phone, storing the raw video rather than a version uploaded to WhatsApp, Facebook, or Instagram, or YouTube is really important for preserving this metadata. And we're sort of developing a set of guides for how to best record evidence using the devices we all have, namely keeping the original files, filming continuously rather than starting and stopping, moving your camera around to capture all your surroundings in 360, if you can, giving commentary on what you're seeing, and taking note of what device you're filming on. So what followed, and is still an ongoing process now, is the camera tracking and projection mapping of the footage to our 3D model. So here, somewhat ironically, we're deploying workflows that were originally intended for CGI in Hollywood films to track the motion of cameras recording footage. An algorithm in 3D software searches for features recognizable in adjacent frames and records the distance in pixels that that feature moves. And so by doing this for hundreds of features across all the frames of a video, the motion can be averaged to extract the orientation, focal length, and motion of the camera. And we then treat this camera as a projector in our 3D model and apply the moving footage from a moving virtual projector, which results in the footage appearing stabilized on the surface of our model. And for Grenfell, this was particularly useful as it allowed us to reference events seen in the footage against an accurate 3D model of the building, such as when lights switch on or off, or when flats become affected by fire. And the hope is that this exercise, when combined with a record of emergency calls, text messages, fire crew radio transmissions, and survivor testimonies, will provide a method for organizing data that places temporally and spatially adjacent events adjacent in the actual archive. So the way we usually describe this phenomena is that a firefighter and survivor might pass each other in a staircase, and their subsequent testimonies might recount this same event, but their testimonies in document format might be separated by hundreds of pages and files, allowing connections between them to be easily missed. And so alternatively, by building a spatial and temporal 3D model, we put these events next to each other, allowing correlations to be exposed and read. So this methodology of camera tracking and projection mapping is something we use frequently, but it faces significant challenges when we take our investigations into other contexts, into the open sea, where everything is in motion. And the liquid and dynamic nature of the sea erases traces and imprints, giving every piece of visual evidence a fleeting lifespan. And so the next case describes in brief some of the techniques that we developed to get around this challenge. So this is our investigation of the seizure of the Juventa, which was an NGO search and rescue vessel that used to operate in the central Mediterranean Sea. To give a bit of context, this investigation is one of a series of incidents that we've looked at describing the closed sea condition imposed by Italy and the EU on central Mediterranean by containing migrants on Libyan shores. On the one hand, many NGOs involved in search and rescue have been criminalised and their vessels seized, and those still in operation have had their liberties to give assistance to drowning migrants severely curtailed. On the other hand, Italy has funded the Libyan Coast Guard and provided vessels to bring migrants at sea back to Libya. So on June 18th last year, the German NGO vessel Juventa was involved in a search and rescue operation off the coast of Libya. An undercover agent on board another NGO vessel, the Vos Hestia, photographed and reported the operation to Italian prosecutors. So his photographs were used to accuse the Juventa of cooperation with Libyan traffickers. And these allegations revolve around the key claim that the crew of the Juventa, after rescuing migrants from 3 wooden boats, towed the empty boats back toward Libya and handed them over to traffickers. To evidence this, the prosecution provided just one photo of one of Juventa's inflatable rescue boats towing one of the migrant vessels, a photo showing no horizon with no indication of direction, time, or context. And as a result of these allegations, the Juventa was seized on the 2nd of August later that year and is now still no longer in operation. So every vessel usually transmits AIS, or Automatic Identification System tracking data, even though this is somewhat irregular. And so we began by sourcing these trajectories for the known NGO vessels, and this gave us a loose understanding of the operation relative to Libyan territorial waters. And in an email exchange with the Maritime Rescue Coordination Centre in Rome, we were given the coordinates of the migrant vessel, which was the first piece of evidence that Juventa's presence was totally legitimate. They were ordered to participate in this rescue. So our analyses try to cite evidence visually in both space and time, here representing space on an animated map and time on a dynamic timeline. And also on site and located with AIS was the Vos Hestia, a larger NGO vessel used to ferry rescued migrants to destination ports. Once we located the vessels, we were able to move into 3D, making first attempts at reconstruction from the first photograph of the incident, when the Juventa captured 2 of the migrant vessels from a camera on its bow. So when we know the focal length and corresponding field of view of photograph from its metadata, like we were saying before, we can treat this camera as a projector, throwing the image back into 3D space to establish distances between objects. And soon after this photograph, a GoPro video from their rescue vessel begins. So using identifiable shapes in the clouds, we treated them as the most stable elements in this scene, and we tried to algorithmically track the camera's motion to reproduce it digitally. So this allowed us to track the horizon in every direction relative to the GoPro, and luckily for us, during this video, the boat drifts in a full 360-degree circle as the crew gives safety advice to the migrants. So this allowed us to create a virtual sky dome and a horizon across which our footage, now projected from a dynamic camera, paints a panorama, a theatre within which the operation takes place. And in a way, the rotation of the camera inadvertently becomes a visual radar, sweeping across the scene and allowing us to plot the relative headings to vessels spotted as blurred pixels on the horizon. Then by counting the pixel height of these vessels and comparing that to the known height of the boats, we could use trigonometry to estimate their distance from the camera. So this technique gave us a base map for determining the relative positions of the migrant boats to the NGO ships, which was necessary as those wooden vessels don't have tracking data. So in addressing this issue of towing the migrant vessel back to Libyan waters, we obtained a short section of footage from which the still used in the accusation was taken. And we wanted to analyse the direction of wave movement and compare them with wind charts for the time and day of the event, to work out what direction the boat was being towed. So as the footage is taken on a handheld camera, we first had to track and stabilise the shot to remove motion from the camera from affecting our perceived wave motion. And once we'd stabilised the footage, we could track points of contrast in the footage and observe a general right to left motion in the waves, indicating that Juventa's crew were towing the migrant boat against the direction of the wind. So simulating the water's surface illustrates this movement. And when we compare this directionality with wind charts from the 18th of June, we see that this evidence used to imply that Juventa towed boats back to Libyan territorial waters, in fact, most likely shows that the boat is being towed north, away from the coastline. And as is often the case with our investigations, we later received additional material partway through our research. And in the new files that we received was included a time-lapse shot by one of the inflatable boats of the Vos Hestia. So luckily, each of these photos in the time-lapse included GPS metadata, which gave us precise locations and times for each image. And in several of these images, the same scene from the accusation can be seen from a different angle. And these images clearly show that Lily, which was Juventa's inflatable, was towing the empty wooden boat back towards Juventa, not back towards Libya. In addition, when we compare 2 photographs in which the Lily can be seen in both, we can infer that during the time of the towing, the Lily moved approximately 800 metres northwest, again demonstrating that the boat was not being towed south. So despite this counter-investigation, the Juventa is currently still impounded in the port of Trapani, while everyday migrant lives remain imperiled and are denied assistance from those both best trained and equipped to rescue them. So what this research has revealed are a set of digital tools that we hope to use for further image analysis at sea, where loss of life is hidden both optically and politically. And more than ever, we require an increasing engagement with digital imaging for recording, verification, and analysis, just to make tangible the invisible effects of policy made in faraway chambers. And this brings me to the final example that I'll show you today, which is a case that we've called the long duration of the split second, referring to how split-second decisions have embedded within them long histories of cultural conditioning from which prevalent social and political narratives can be read. So this case is quite complicated, so I'm just going to show you one part of it that directly relates to the methods described in the previous work. So the event took place in the Negev desert in Israel, where the Bedouin village of al-Hiran was raided by Israeli police the morning before its residents were to be forcibly evicted, as part of a general strategy of Israel to relocate Bedouin settlements. And on the morning of the raid, a number of activists and journalists gathered at the site to film and support the villagers' claim to their land. And this raid, which took place before dawn, was described by Karen Manor, who was a journalist on the site, as a war zone. This chaos was captured in a series of short videos taken by her, and while she wasn't aware at the time, the dark videos captured critical information for our analysis of the event that followed. In her footage and others, a moment of confusion quickly escalates into an event that saw shots fired and a vehicle crash, leaving policeman Erez Levy and villager Yaqub Musa Al-Kian dead and many others injured. So according to the initial police narrative, the villager, Al-Kian, drove his car into the policeman, running him over in an act of terror. And to substantiate this claim, they stated that Al-Kian was driving with his headlights off and at high speed. To investigate this claim, we cross-referenced Karen's footage against a low-quality leaked video of police thermal footage shot from a helicopter on site. And in this footage, we see Al-Kian's car moving slowly and groups of policemen converging towards his position. He accelerates down the road, appearing to hit a group of policemen before seeming to lose control, and is finally stopped by another vehicle. However, before he accelerates, we see a black cloud of hot air that appears for several frames in front of a policeman facing the car, that indicates the discharge of a weapon. This same phenomena can be seen twice more, and these shots synchronize perfectly with shots heard in the audio channel of Karen Manor, who was coincidentally filming at the same time. The acceleration of the car begins after these shots, indicating that police opened fire before the car sped up. Additionally, with the geography of the event clarified by the thermal footage, we realized that Karen's footage and the footage of a nearby Al Jazeera reporter both captured Al-Kian's car at the moment of these shots. And crucially, in both pieces of footage, we can see that the headlights are on. In the journalist's footage, we see four figures cross the silhouette of the car. And to verify that this is indeed Al-Kian's car, we mapped the movement of policemen according to a stabilized projection of the thermal footage. So here we see, in the Al Jazeera video, four silhouettes passing in front of Al-Kian's car. And we just wanted to make sure that we'd actually spotted the right car if we were going to claim that the headlights were on. So we compared this with the known positions of policemen at this time according to the thermal video to see if these perspectives would result in the same four silhouettes crossing the car. So we see these four figures cross the car in the same way, and this thus corroborates the thermal footage and the Al Jazeera recording, and shows that the car with the headlights on is indeed Al-Kian's. So with the headlights on, this casts doubt on the police narrative that this was a premeditated terror attack. An additional piece of evidence makes it extremely unlikely that Al-Kian's acceleration was indicative of a terror attack. In the thermal footage, the ground appears to be flat. However, when we plot the car's acceleration on a 3D model that we constructed of the site, it becomes apparent that the vehicle accelerates as the incline of the terrain increases. So here the projection of the video into 3D space highlights how the slope was likely what caused the acceleration of the vehicle. Furthermore, a leaked autopsy report revealed that he'd been shot in the knee, which raises the possibility that one of the 3 shots before he accelerated disabled him and caused him to lose control of the car, and that it was potentially this, in combination with the landscape, that resulted in the death of policeman Erez Levy. So far, in the light of these findings, the police on site have not been properly investigated, and so our work on this case is ongoing. So as a civil practice, we come from a position of optical inferiority. Full datasets and informations are often withheld, and this puts our work at the periphery. The evidence that is in the public is by nature at the edge. And so in order to draw out meaningful information, our work must often operate at the edge of evidence and media, and we have to look for connections between disparate sources. Looking beyond the frames of photographs and videos, or in between the words of testimonies, to see how we might infer data from them, and data from the relationships between them. So our practice revolves around looking for these truth misalignments and factual corroborations between disparate sources of media. And in always citing evidence in navigable spatial and temporal models, we try never to experience evidence in the singular, but rather inhabit an environment that displays this evidence simultaneously. We believe that in a world where versions of truth, narrative, and media are so overabundant and entangled, the development of tools to unravel these relationships has never been more important. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nathan Su. Any questions from directly? I think the complexity of the material you were presenting us is, at least for my little brain, a little overwhelming, because there is something like probably thousands of hours of work and labor in it, and it is a totally different aspect of how to use database than we have been speaking before. I think it's highly interesting, and it really opens up for me and personally a totally new field, even if I saw naturally the installation over there. So my first question is, on which basis are you picking your research objects or subjects?
So we usually take on cases through a number of avenues. Often we're approached by an NGO or groups like Amnesty International have approached us to ask to collaborate on investigations. So sometimes we enter when research on a case is already well underway from another agency and they need specific analysis of optical objects. In those cases we're given media and asked, what are we able to say with these pieces of media? Another way is sometimes we're approached much earlier on in an investigation. And we're asked, it's usually a case where the truth around, or rather the facts around what happened in an event are highly ambiguous. And in those cases, we often then engage with the process of data mining, where we sort of scour the, both sort of locally by asking people who are present on site, and by searching the internet for recordings. We try to build an understanding of what happened that way. And then, I guess, from another point of view, we also sometimes, as was with 2 of these cases, do projects on a self-initiated basis. So where we think that our skill set has something to offer, and where our office really believes that some questions need to be at least raised, if not addressed, we take those projects on our own. And then within each project, the choice of what media to use and how to use it is very much based on our ability to link it to other media. So our first task is always to try to synchronize images, synchronize videos. And what we've found quite consistently is that it's in the relationships between different media objects, in understanding that when we see the same event from 2 perspectives, we get far more information than when we see it from one. That's what helps us choose what media to work with, because not all of the media always can be synchronized. So we prioritize stuff that sits within a sort of collaborative media archive.
Is there always, are there always enough data, or did you have to drop down a project because you didn't find enough data?
Yeah, there's definitely not always enough data, and so that's one of the criteria in how we decide whether it's not only good for us, but good for the people that we're working for us to be involved. For us to be involved, there needs to be obviously the sort of human rights and political angle, but also the media angle that means that there is some sort of evidence that we can address. In the past, we have looked at cases where the evidence is purely testimonial, without images, and in those cases, it's been cases that have evolved more around developing tools for assisting and reconstructing space through memory and testimony. But always, like before we start an investigation, there's sort of a pre-investigation phase that works out how capable we are to solve those problems. I can hear you.
Do you ever feel it's necessary to make site visits? I guess the way traditional forensic investigators used to do things, or is it about what's remotely available?
It's both. So in the case that I just showed you in the Negev desert, part of the investigation was a site visit where we reconstructed the event on site. So we got the same model of vehicle, members of the villagers who were there on the day helped us roll the same vehicle down the same slope to verify speed. So we do physical reenactments on site as part of it. A lot of it comes down to access, whether we have access to the sites that we're investigating and whether it's, it's safe to send a team there, whether the site that we're investigating still exists is also a problem that we face. And so if it's possible for us to go on site, we often will try. But in a lot of our cases, for practical and political reasons, that's sometimes not possible. And part of that is also that condition that I was talking about of our sort of optical inferiority, where we're coming from a position where we have restricted access to locations, we have restricted access to evidence, and so we're really trying to develop tools that allow us to augment publicly available evidence. So it's both, and ideally, where we can, we try to go on site, but it doesn't always happen.
And currently, you're being approached by organisations which, for want of a better phrase, see themselves as being on the right side of history. At the same time, good forensic protocols must make no judgments.
Absolutely.
Is there a conflict of interest there?
I mean, the way we try to treat evidence is that I guess we can come from two angles. One is that in our actual analysis, we try to never show anything that the media itself doesn't show. So, like, we try to only to highlight things within, and when I say media, I guess I refer not to media narratives of media organisations, but to the pieces of evidence, visual and sonic, that we have. From the other point of view, though, we do believe that there is a power differential in how the narratives around state violence are constructed. And so we are also, while we try to always be objective as we can, we do also see a role for the organisation to provide these counter-narratives that run in parallel to narratives driven by sort of state agendas as well. So, and I think that sort of gaze of sort of forensics with an agenda is not something that is unique to counter-forensics, in the sense that forensics done as traditionally by the state is also subject to the same sort of agendas that may back that investigation.
Hi, I have a sort of a technical question. you spoke of the synchronizing process in the beginning, and I was wondering how much is the computer doing of this work, and how much do you have to correct it, and is it getting, the ratio, is it getting better and better?
Currently our synchronization is almost 100% manual. So it's from a researcher sitting in front of all the footage and like looking for and listening for things that sound the same, that look the same. As we grow as an agency and as our cases become more complicated and as more people film these events as time goes on, this becomes a more and more taxing operation, right? When it's fine to synchronize 10 pieces of footage, when we're dealing with 1,000 pieces of footage to synchronize is a colossal task. So we're also investigating ways to sort of embed this within machine learning, but this is very new territory for us. And so obviously before we actually use that to do anything, we need to have verified that it works within our own workflow. It's a hope for the future that we're able to integrate sort of human research and machine research. But at the moment, most of our synchronization is done manually.
One short question in between. Does it work? Yeah. And one short question in between. How do you finance your projects? The projects are brought to you by organizations. Are these organizations also paying your work like a regular Gutachter, whatever that is meaning? I don't know the English word. Kennt jemand die englische Bedeutung des Wortes Gutachter? Consultant? Maybe.
Yeah. So. We have a few different sources of funding. We're funded by a few European arts grants and human rights grants, and we're also, so part of our funding comes from sort of arts and education funding. We are also often commissioned by the organisations that approach us, but we're a non-profit organisation, so the commissions are just to cover the labour and the tools and technologies to perform the investigations. Those organisations that work with us are sometimes galleries that are commissioning an art piece. They're sometimes media organisations that are looking to do a collaboration, so news channels, that sort of thing, and sometimes human rights organisations.
Okay, thank you. This would have been my question, but now I can ask something else. So, for instance, the project you did for the documenta, I don't want to be polite, but I'm wondering how much did it cost the organization? I was wondering, because it's a kind of economic counter. How much does it cost to show that one state is lying, or to construct the counter narrative? I was wondering.
Yeah, I don't have enough information on the precise budgeting for every project to be able to give you a figure for that. Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't give you a precise number.
Because your group is very big and you're working a long time on the project, so I was wondering, it must be huge. So that was my.
Yeah, I mean, it depends also. Like we obviously want to do this work, and we think that this work is important. Like any cost is to cover the necessary production. And we're a growing team, but we are still quite small. We're, medium-sized now, sort of 19 people. And we usually have sort of 2 to 3 researchers working on a case. And as far as cost goes, it does vary depending on what the techniques used are. Some of our cases go for years, some of our cases go for days, because sometimes an investigation can be like a 2-day response where we just do a 3D model, match one photograph, and that's our investigation. In other cases, we might be getting updated information over 2 to 3 years as information is slowly released from courts and that sort of thing. And then those projects take a lot longer. So there's a huge variance in cost of labour and time.
And the second, it's more a remark, but somehow when I look at the videos, it reminds me of, for the visual things I see, it reminds me of kind of Hollywood films where they prepare an attack or somewhere, and this is a bit frightening to see it. It's hunting in a way, to see the material implanted into it, so the reality getting into it. So it's really, it strikes, and it's really tough to see your works. So thank you very much for your works.
Thanks. This is also about my work. You haven't seen my presentation yesterday, but
Yeah, sorry.
No problem. But aren't we running into the problem that we're becoming complicit? And this is this troubles me with my own work, because if we access certain topics in certain ways, we make them cool, we make them accessible, we make them fancy. And if I look at the work, maybe, okay, let's not talk about your work, let's not talk about my work, let me bitch about Trevor Paglen. He made surveillance, the whole surveillance apparatus, extremely fashionable through his work. It's brilliant to look at. But this problem is that especially surveillance is a topic that feasts off our attention, that needs our attention to really function. And if you point the finger in such a fancy way, I mean, the research is good, but what the heck has it to do in an art environment, I think? Because it becomes extremely wonderful and nice to look at and fancy. But to me, and my own work is the same, I have the same issue with some of my works as well. It's extremely misplaced because we draw the wrong kind of attention to terrible topics. Isn't that an issue? No.
So, can I make an initial response to that? And then, I think this is like a territory that we're very aware of, like this condition that we're always afraid that we're sensationalizing violence in a way. And I think that it's something that we have to tread very carefully with and be aware that it's possible that we're doing it. And this is why it is also like, it's been problematic for us to work within sort of the realm of calling ourselves artists. But at the same time, I think it is our hope, and I mean, it's interesting that it comes across as fancy, but our hope is that our work uses the tools that are necessary for the communication of our analyses in a way that makes sense, right? And there is a reason that we do it in film and not in a report, for example. Like, we could reformat all these cases as a 20-page report or as a 200-page report, and often we do for legal cases. So when we're working within a legal forum, we often use different media formats. But it precisely creates the condition which we're trying to resist, which is that the media are observed asynchronously. And so at the moment, maybe because it's new, or maybe because it's seen as sort of an innovative visual practice, we're creating techniques that come across as like being overly aestheticized. And it's something that we're trying to struggle with, is how do we develop a visual language that is able to communicate without being sort of an overly aesthetic piece, but that communicates everything we want to say clearly in a way that's consumable to an audience. And I do think it's important that this work makes it out of courtrooms and into public mind.
Yeah, I felt that the piece that you had in the show was not theatrical at all. I thought it was very fact-based, and I thought you took the emotion out of it.
Yeah,
so,
we try.
Yeah, I didn't get the same feeling that you got about it. So I think that yours is actually, you're creating art and you're trying to show your thinking and what your conclusions are, where they're looking for facts strictly.
But it's not fact. It's one that has the facts. It is. I think there is a big difference between the two artworks.
Yes.
There's one connection link, but there's a big difference. Even if you shake your head, I nod. And I think that is really necessary because you have, you both have something which has a basic layer, which means, or basic, a common ground, which means you start acting after something has happened. And you're trying to reconstruct something which has happened on a time-based level. This is something which is totally different from at least what you were presenting there. You were showing, you are presenting and showing things. So, but I also have a question, and this question is, what kind of results can you gain with your research when you put it into a law case, or when you bring it to public? As we saw from that Juventa ship, it is still there, and I mean, obviously, Italian government seems to be pretty scary right now, but despite that, are there any positive results of the work you did so far as an institution?
So I mean, a few of the cases have resulted in reopening of court cases, and in the sort of, for example, a white phosphorus case resulted in the US saying that they were no longer going to use those weapons. It is a difficult thing for us, though, as we have limited legitimacy in both the art world and in the legal world, in the sense that these two narratives often like run against each other sometimes. And so our attitude is really, though, that I think that shouldn't stop us from doing the work, right? That if there is information there that is being misrepresented, and we think that we're able to offer another narrative into the world, like that for us already that is valuable, right? And that's a reason to do it. Of course, our hope is that, you know, we were hoping that the video we produced for Juventa would result in at least a reconsideration of them releasing the vessel. And in many cases, sadly, that doesn't come to pass, but I think it's still work that's important to do.
Okay, thank you very much. We are a little, we are over time, and we are having a final round in which we also can have questions. So I'm kindly asking you to stay, and I'm also asking the other artists having had their presentations today, including David and Anna, who did not join us yesterday, over there. Would you like to come over here? Thank you. Yeah, nice to see you. Those in the dark. Today we started with Alistair and his and a lecture without any image, and I wonder what the link between the span of Alistair's work, who is speaking about how much he enjoys working easily and without big equipment, and this and your work, which is heavily computer and technology based. It is a huge span, and is there? My question to you, Alistair, do you see a link between the work you are doing and they are doing?
No. very precise.
But, sorry.
I think he's doing something so worthwhile, and not for himself. He's doing things for others, and for others to create an innocence or a guilt or an excuse or a political reason, whereas I'm not. I'm doing something so completely selfish and just for my own form of release of some vague form of creativity or something to say or an expression or an opinion, that no, I don't think I have anything to do with the worthwhile work he's doing, sadly.
But you're creating it for the public, don't you?
Yes, of course, yes, I'm creating, no, I'm not creating for the public, I'm creating for myself that the public can see, and they can either take enjoyment or take something from whatever I do. So I'm doing something which is very personal to me, and I can only release it when I'm satisfied myself. And I do the same thing with my commercial clients as well. So I need to first tick my boxes before I can claim it as mine. So I have to own it. So it's quite different.
Maybe this is the perfect demonstration of the difference and of the big range we're actually in. And when Ina was holding her speech before, I had to take a picture because it was so great between these oil on canvas works we are actually in and talking about in this context. And you had it was this picture from the work where they were telling, let this be a warning. So I think it was a great moment. But maybe coming to you, Cord, these pictures, these also constructed pictures, construction of actual realities. In some years it will be history. So in your working field, how do you handle these pictures?
That's a very interesting question, because we have these artifacts destroyed being cultural heritage. I think it's the same process. There's some technical version to build them up on a screen. Some historians would say, okay, they're even better on screen because we are able to move in them what we couldn't have done before. We are allowed to go to these places and we can do things which we had no access to these areas before. I think it's a very interesting thing when you can have something in a dry 3D in three-dimensional, or if you have an augmented reality. I thought about exhibitions in streets. We have got more information than you will have without these tools. There's ever a dark side. Whatever we are doing, we can find this dark side. At the end, maybe there's no real reality anymore, because we see everything is constructed by someone, sometime, in some way. It stands for a lot of our history. It's a construction from time on. Even historians are sitting, taking their sources real and reconstruct history from this time on backwards.
Thank you.
Well, I think there's a perfectly clear connection, and that's to do with the fact that all lens-based images are artworks and documents at the same time. That's just in the nature of them. The mechanical part points towards the document, and the fact that decisions are made in the making of an image points in the direction of interpretation, subjectivity, and art. I mean, just to give you an example, let's say an artistically minded photographer happened to make a picture of the mosque. There's no reason why that photograph couldn't become a useful element in a 3D reconstruction of that mosque. It doesn't need to have been made with that intention, but that potential is always there. And I would have thought that that's why photography became so interesting and so perplexing and didn't die in the middle of the 19th century when it was, quote unquote, invented. It's still with us because of those very deep tensions between the artwork and the document. They are a structural condition of those kinds of images.
Raise a little question for this, because would you say that what Ina presented, the augmented reality examples and the VR examples, are also in this dualism, or is it something else? Is it maybe not photography in this sense?
Can I start by responding to that and maybe that at the same time? For me, I think what sort of connects, all the work that's been discussed today, and I think I agree that there is a connection, I think, between our work, which is that they're born of a new condition where everybody is able to publish their own point of view, right? And I think that one of the main changes in agency that the smartphone has produced is not so much the ability that anyone can take a picture, but it's that anybody can publish a picture, and that picture is able to be searched and looked for by just about anybody else. And I think that the making public of like multiplicitous points of view is a really interesting condition that's going to change the way we understand reality, in the sense that we understand it as a very subjective state. And I think that I'm personally very interested in augmented reality and mixed reality, and I think that at the moment these tools are at a point where I think there's still a lot of like interface in between the experience and the world, which means that they're very like socially awkward devices. But I think that as they become, I don't think that's likely to stay. Like, I think that like the first telephones are also very like difficult to use and socially awkward. And I think that as that changes, as more and more we get the ability not to just inhabit other people's points of views captured in a singular point of time or within a singular frame, but rather can inhabit sort of the ways that other people experienced as recorded through virtual and augmented realities. I think that it's the same problem, but like, and opportunity, but expanded like 1,000-fold. And so I think that there is a direct relevance to virtual reality and augmented reality, and we need to sort of think ahead for how to handle the time when that is more ubiquitous. Yeah.
I'd just go at it the other way and say that all images are virtual. I mean, they are all, I think Anna made that point quite clear in the presentation we were giving, that she's interested in images that are the space of an imaginative projection. And you can't not look at images and imaginatively project. And maybe that was the fate of 3D cinema. It's not as if you can't imaginatively project onto a flat rectangle, especially a particularly illusionistic one. And there's nothing to stop looking at, well, let's say that one, because that seems to be the most interesting one in the room, because it looks like she's taking a selfie. There's nothing to stop looking at that being a deeply, profoundly immersive experience. You don't need glasses to do that, I don't think. All images must be virtual.
Oh, virtual. I was interested in the context. I really like the title of this conference/exhibition, Smartest Photography, Be an Artist Today. It reminds me of one of my favorite books, which is a very simple collection of essays brilliantly compiled together by American writer Marvin Heiferman. It's called Photography is Everything. Maybe some of you have heard. So the collection of essays on widely varied subjects, that are covered within photography. And I thought about your work, and I knew of it, but very sort of surface knowledge. I'm really glad we caught your talk. So thinking about, I remember the news coming up about the Turner Prize, and I thought, oh, well, forensic architecture, what does that have to do with art? There's always this conversation. I don't think it ever went away. What is art? Is our dialogue art? Can we present it in that context? Is this art? But then listening to you speak today, and you somewhat responded to that question. Well, what's other outlet is there to reach the widest possible audience? And I'm thinking about also investigation that Errol Morris have done, American filmmaker, looked at the Cannonball positioning by Roger Fenton. I'm sure you've heard of that sort of fascinating report. And this was on, when I was teaching at a community college, this was on our art shelves. So this is a section where otherwise none of my students would have ever gone to look at, long report like that. So, but this was read within sort of an art and photography context. So in terms of that outreach, I think it's a sort of a brilliant channel, art, right? And talking about its consumability, right? And yeah.
Yeah, but are you crossing, the work that he's doing is very fact-based, I think. If you take surveillance cameras, how many surveillance cameras are in London? They aren't set up to get the artistic view of the building. They're set up to get as much data and information as they can get. So I think that now you're trying to cross them into art, where I think the importance of their non-for-profit is to tell the truth and call governments on things that they're doing wrong and people that are doing wrong. At least what I saw from the exhibit of his and his talk today, I don't see, I'm sure he can cross over into the art world on other projects, but the projects that I was looking at, the mosque and so forth, I don't see where it had anything to do with art.
I think there's a quite simple answer to that. When you look at the Documenta piece, this is when I came across the work for the first time. It addresses an issue that was not treated properly by German police. Somebody had to do it, and if it's done in an art context, it's done in an art context because that was the only one available at the time. Basta.
And art gives a certain kind of protection to some views which are politically not allowed to, be addressed, or, there won't be any audience. Where is the right audience for such kind of truth? So, and art might be the place. Yeah.
It's interesting that you could, that discussion that just happened there is the permanent condition of lens-based images. There are lots of photographic artists that say, oh, why do we have to keep fighting for the status of photography as art? And I always think, well, be careful what you wish for, because it's usually the practices that are not quite accepted. That's where the energy is. That's where the interest is. But I could argue the point sort of both ways. You could say, well, there's an understanding of art as the space of a pursuit of ambiguity. Forensic architecture are looking to disambiguate images. And so on that basis, you could exclude them on the basis that's what they're after. Another more open-minded way of thinking about art is that an artist is anyone who produces a new representation of the world. It could be a carpenter, it could be a lawyer, it could be a child, it could be an architect, it could be someone who puts coloured mud on canvas. It's the production of new modes of understanding that is art. That would be another way of, I'm not settling for either of those positions, but I do think that debate is within, particularly within photography, and it's interesting because it won't resolve. You can't resolve it. There is no resolving of the tension between the art and the document character of the medium. I don't think.
I think you are very right, but one of my favorite definitions of art is that you can speak of art if different people have different views on the subject and are able to rationalize it. That is something which is always very helpful for me to see, and I think under this aspect your work is definitely art, because there are so many different views on it, and that it would be a perfect example.
I had a feeling the original question that you proposed was the similarity of my work and his work, and I said no, and I still stand by having listened to a few different opinions. I think from my point of view, the reason why I have a camera is because I have a point of view. It's because I have my opinion. I'm paid to have my opinion, and sometimes I have to fight for my own opinion. And my question to you is, do you have your opinion personally, or is what you do working purely on fact of the opinion of a camera being pointed towards a person, and that is the opinion that you take? So I'm not going to get into the discussion of whether it's art or not art. This is not the point, but I think the point of a photographer is to have an opinion and to show that opinion in that technical way, and it is a technical way to use a camera. The camera doesn't do anything, it just does what it does, and we use the camera for that way just to express ourselves.
I mean, we're dealing with very charged topics with the work that we do, and so of course I have my personal opinions on what we're dealing with. Everyone in the office has their personal opinions, you know, because of who we are. A lot of them are aligned, but often we also disagree on things, and emotionally there's definitely a level of engagement with the work that is very subjective. It's something that we have to make transparent though, in the way that we work. So when we work, and this is more in our internal workflows, we try to make sure that we're always able to differentiate between interpretation and sort of corroboration between pieces of media. And I think when we talk about opinion, it's also worth mentioning that it's not just our opinion that we're dealing with when we get a piece of evidence. We're also, in a way, dealing with the opinion of the person who chose to film. We're dealing with the opinion of the person who chose to release that evidence to us. We're dealing with the opinion of the people who have asked us to do the investigation with that evidence, right? And often embedded in the way a person films, in what they film, in when they turn off their camera, when they turn on their camera, they're live editing already a version of fact or truth. And so our investigation is really how do you place all of these edited versions of reality next to each other in such a way that what is opinion is apparent, so that it becomes evident what has already had a layer of interpretation placed on it, and it's very easy to insert our own interpretations, because we obviously we want certain outcomes for the world. We want if we spend 2.5 months working on something, we want to achieve something as well. So there's all of those very human desires embedded in the way we work. We're people just like everyone else. So I just think this is it's a challenge, but it's also something that is inherently part of the work, is this navigation of points of view. And so what we're looking at are just techniques, and some of them are like workflow techniques that are like to do with how we file files and how we name things. Some of them are communication techniques to do with how we represent with virtual cameras. We're just trying to find techniques that make these interpretations more clear. Yeah.
The last time, 2.5 years ago, when we had our closing discussion, we were fewer people in here, and but it was a very nice conference. And what was really good was that we were speaking in the end about what did the audience miss in that conference. So if anybody of yours comes up with anything that you've been missing in the conference, some aspects, views on the field of smartphone photography, on the wider field, we would be really delighted to hear it, because that would be a very nice opportunity to get better the next time, or have an idea or a basic idea for the next conference, hopefully in 2 years. Yeah,
today I'm in the audience, see? We were talking so much about the way photography is used, whether it's art, whether it's not, cell phones, smartphones, whatever. But what is our responsibility if we're using photography? I missed that a little bit. What do we actively do with it? So everyone used it for in some way, some fashion, but we maybe in a discussion we could agree that everything can be interpreted as propaganda in some ways, and everyone does his own propaganda. But how could we actively use it, utilize it, maybe for the better? That's something you definitely try. I think I have my issues with it, but how could we do that? That's the stuff I missed.
David was missing a lot.
No, I wasn't missing a lot. No, I said I heard it.
So
no,
while you are thinking, I would love to answer you, and it also answers your question. As a photographer, I don't feel the necessity to have an opinion. I think it's necessary to raise questions. And this is also art for me, to raise questions to the audience.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. That's an interesting point, because cameras particularly do allow you to make images and make work without a very clear sense of your own intention. And of course, the meaning of a work doesn't come from the author of it, it comes from whoever receives it. And you combine those two things, and it gets complicated immediately. Mixed intentions and mixed receptions. I think there was...
Ich rede auf Deutsch, nicht auf Englisch. Kann ja übersetzen. Was mir ein bisschen gefehlt hat, ist die junge Generation, also die 17- bis 25-Jährigen vielleicht, die hätte ich gerne auch noch hier vertreten gesehen, weil das ja sozusagen bei Smartphone Photography für mich so die Generation ist, die damit groß geworden ist, und irgendwie wäre das vielleicht auch nochmal spannend gewesen. So.
She's missing the younger generation.
I'm quite young. I think I'm young enough to. I'm young enough to go on Instagram, and young enough to use an iPhone, and young enough to try and be with it. Try, but I know what you mean. It's You want to see a 12-year-old up here maybe and have a point. Yes, there you go.
Last year, millennial on the threshold. And as a millennial, you are too, right? I'm sure. in terms of civic responsibility, I guess, or responsibility with using photography, well, coming into it from sort of the artist's perspective, the least thing I want to do is to sort of dictate meaning of my work, to have it sort of embedded too hard in it. I very much want to leave it open and fluid to the viewer. And for me, even my photography, both studio practice and documentary practice, is really just the means to process. With documentary, to process the world, as cheesy as it sounds. With studio practice, it's a stream of consciousness and just a stream of thought, which in no way dictates the meaning of it.
Yeah, I'm not an artist to take up responsibility, but as a curator, I would say, of course, I have this responsibility, what exhibition I'm doing, realizing what artists I'm showing or not, and which topics are relevant or not. So I think there is a kind of responsibility, and you should keep that in mind, but I don't know if it's a question where you could say, like, well, you should take up responsibility in this or that sense, and you have always the discourse around the exhibition, and you have the exhibition itself, and this opens up a discourse as well.
And of course, there is not one answer to Simon's question. You should be super happy that there's not a Politburo telling you what to do. I mean, you know, it's a free country after all, and I'm quite happy about that. And there's quite a number of approaches how to do art. I think try to make a proposal how to look at one aspect of work. That's my approach. If you have a different one, that's fine.
Imagine a museum put on a show called Responsible Art. It'd be interesting to imagine what would be in it, what would the criteria be for choosing those works, and whether an audience would want to see it. Yeah, I want to go to a show called Responsible Art.
Every artist is responsible somehow.
Sure, they are. They are.
We should think about the way our responsibility.
I think we all do that.
We have to think about the way our responsibility plays out. That's what I would like to us address, because we are all doing something, and everything we are doing has some causes something to happen or not, and but it's because we are facing so much of the term of this overly used term of fake news and propaganda that's always out there, and in a way many of us try to counter it, but then there comes with it the responsibility. So how do we counter it? What do we counter? What is our role to push back to some levels? You push back to some things, I try to push back to other things. So I would like to address more, not the role which smartphone I use, which glitch is interesting, but what my role in this whole struggle amongst realities and amongst people who create their own narratives, virtual reality, what is my responsibility? The stupidest title would be responsible art, because it's not responsible art, it's art about responsibility.
Also ich kann es gerne nochmal wiederholen. Ein Thema wäre für mich, was wird zu wenig behandelt, was wird nicht gezeigt, zum Beispiel. Wo gibt's sowas wie eine Schere im Kopf, wenn Sachen nicht behandelt werden? Und es gibt ja im Moment, gab ja in einer dieser Kunstzeitungen vor kurzem den Artikel über Zensur im MoMA und in anderen Museen. Also macht es was, hat man da eine Verantwortung und wie sieht die dann aus, also heutzutage?
Okay, that's about that.
I think our responsibility as, well, I feel personally, my responsibility as an artist is to tag on to you, is to ask the right questions, to make the audience, the viewer, just to propel them to think. And there are numerous ways, right, that I can do that, and there are numerous layers in my work which leads to it being read in so many different ways. This is definitely a source of enjoyment for me. You know, it's been placed in so many different contexts. It keeps fascinating me. People say, oh, this is about cliches and kitsch in photography. This is about, you know, sort of overused tropes, about pattern thinking, about, you mentioned fake news. You know, fake news is sort of a statement, right? It's not a question, it's a statement. But it's about, you know, my work, again, was read as something that sort of ridicules amateur photography, that's calendar type kind of redundancy of imagery. But at the same time, it was just recently placed, actually over the past few years, in hospitals, because people found it soothing that those recognizable calendar images are soothing to patients. And for instance, right now, it's in an emergency department where people sit for hours waiting for the patients to come back, because there's so many layers of those calendar images that somebody can just scan through those for hours and not get bored. I find it really, yeah, interesting.
I had, when I was doing the Denver project, we were using these very large cameras, and we were doing contact prints, that then all these work prints were donated to the Denver Library. And it turned out that certain historians at the university then were going through these prints with with magnifying glasses to see information that you literally need a magnifying glass to see in these. So my question is, if my intention was to make a photograph artistically, having nothing to do with history, or being able to read the license plates or the stickers on the license plates, and then someone else takes that over and then uses it for their intention, what's everyone's thought about that type of reuse of information?
Simon dealt with that yesterday a little bit. I think Simon dealt with that in his talk yesterday about censorship and having pictures used for different purposes. No, that you weren't allowed for the Imperial War Museum, for example. I think that's exactly the situation.
I think the time changes our view on artwork. That is, so there are, for instance, there are many artists who were really in high fashion in the Baroque period, and today nobody cares about them because they were simply not so good in our eyes as other ones. So I'm sure that, I mean, you only have to look back like 15 or 20 years and imagine who was big in the art scene in these days. And sure, they are in all the big collections, but they are not so much on the walls right now, and that has a reason, because there's always fashion. So our view and our perception of art changes, and if someone finds something in your artwork which you did some like 25 years ago or 30 years ago, it's wonderful. That tells me that artworks can be used in many different ways, and documents can be used as artwork. That's also a thing. Yeah, artists can work with documents and make something lovely out of it, which is not only bringing us something intellectual feat, but also aesthetic joy. Pardon me?
I said that's how I look at my text files.
I think the impression of the smartphone and what we're all discussing, we all very easily get distracted into different areas, like what is art or what is not art, and then a big discussion on Instagram and then platforms and where we all produce and where we all exhibit or expose ourselves through the smartphone. I think the very core of why we're all here is because of this thing that takes pictures, apparently, and that's what we are using as the medium, is to take pictures with this object, which I don't think was the intention of it, somehow. And we're all sitting here, like I said earlier, in a museum and associated with the gallery in the museum, and we're all up here talking with such great authority. And I don't know, I do wonder where this is all going, and is it worthy? Is the phone worthy? Because at the end of the day, when you have a photograph, the photograph can be incredibly worthy, no matter what it is of. I mean, I went through a whole list of different descriptions of what a photograph can do, and it's this thing which is a calculator, an email, and whatever it is, can actually make something, help you make something that is indeed worthy. And that's art or not art, I'm not going there.
I come back to that nice Oscar Wilde quote that we used in our talk, that, you know, the value of a telephone is the value of the conversation that the two people are having. What you were saying.
So this reminds me of Douglas when we were saying it's not the tool or it's not the thing, it's the vision. So that's, and David, you're saying that a good artwork can be made in any context. So maybe that's the point.
Okay. I would say 3 last questions.
I have one question. What I... Huh? Ach so, du wolltest gerade was sagen. What I missed a bit is that fashion of light. I saw on Instagram. Ich sag's lieber auf Deutsch. Vielleicht kann jemand übersetzen. Und zwar diese Mode von dem Licht, von der Überbelichtung. Also das habe ich seit ein paar Jahren gesehen und da hätte mich interessiert, weil ich habe es auch in Modezeitschriften schon gesehen und mein Eindruck war, Smartphone-Fotografie hat quasi die Mode beeinflusst. Liege ich da richtig? Also sowas hätte mich auch interessiert. Die Modefotografie.
She thinks that smartphone photography somehow influenced fashion photography, and you were yeah.
Since years I've seen that.
No, it has. I mean,
Yes.
fashion is a sponge. It takes it from everything, but it's also very cyclical. It keeps on repeating itself. Fashion is sort of self-analyzes and self-duplicates itself. And of course, if you're representing fashion designs, you also represent their philosophy, and their philosophy has come down to ease of use and a little less high, and it can become very low. And I think the iPhone is a great leveler of the audience because it's more accessible. And yes, absolutely, fashion it does describe what is going on in the world. It's a good news feed, I think, fashion.
And what do you think? Why do they? Is this now? Because in the 80s, black was the color, and now everything is light, and maybe because everybody looks young with the light. I don't know.
I think, well, like I said, fashion does follow news, and news doesn't follow fashion. So what is relevant today is a political. Fashion can be incredibly political, and so are fashion photographs are also delicately political as well. So it's all commenting on each other. Fashion comments on what is politically going on at the same time, for sure.
On? Oh, yeah. I just wanted to say something. I mean, if this goes into the 3rd round and we are, I don't know, in 2 years still speaking about smartphone photography or whatever, in those days now we had like many artists here that already have their artistic practice, so the phone is just an extra tool to work with for them. And for me, it would be really interesting to see some positions or to hear some people who came into art thanks to a camera in their phone. So this is about the new generation of photographers which is currently growing up and that has access to photography thanks to their phone.
There was already a movie filmed entirely on iPhone that got an Oscar in 2017, right? Tangerine. So technology is certainly not the limit, right, for artistic expression. That's all I wanted to say.
I just say something to tie that point together with the question of the younger generation. I teach, or at least I try to, and I suppose one very strong concern I have, let's say around an 18, 19-year-old coming into photography, is that compared to a generation before, they have a less distinct sense of their own photography in relation to other people's photography. And they often mimic things without knowing that they're doing it. The algorithms that we often talk about have their analog, if you like, in human culture, and it's very difficult to get students sometimes to distinguish between their own work and other people's work. It is often a very fluid thing, and they have a hard time distinguishing where their own sense of what they're interested in or discovering, or their own images overlaps with memes and tropes and other things that are out there already. That is a challenge. That was always there, and most art was always derivative. Originality is a rare thing. So it's not that that's a new problem, but it certainly has been exaggerated by the kind of image culture that we live in now. If I have any responsibility, it's there to that question, I think.
Okay, dann sage ich Danke. Ich sage Danke an euch, ich sage Danke an Dieter Gräf, ich sage Danke Dorothea für die Unterstützung, danke Friederike, dem ganzen Team von der Biennale, danke Simon Menner, danke Rosa Roth, danke Katrin Könning, Joachim Schmidt, danke für deine anregenden Beiträge, danke Jasmin, dass du das Ding zusammen mit uns aufgesetzt hast. Danke euch allen auf der Bühne. Thank you all for being with us, for joining us. I liked it a lot. It was a lovely conference. It was fluid. It was not boring in any sense. That is what you made it to. And ich hoffe, wir sehen uns in 2 Jahren wieder bei einer spannenden, unterhaltsamen Veranstaltung. I hope we will all meet again. We will meet definitely. And there are some. So, es war schön. Danke, dass ihr da wart. Kommt gut nach Hause.